Today's video isn't so much a recipe share, although I will provide the recipe down below. I wanted to share with you I'm finally using another jar of my home canned sweet potatoes. If you watched my What I Will Can and Not Can Again video, I mentioned how I have home canned sweet potatoes and I do not like them. They really are not good for a side of sweet potatoes. But I did finally discover the perfect way to use them, and that is in a biscuit. Sweet potato biscuits are so good. So I'm basically working a pretty basic a pretty basic biscuit dough together. I'm just incorporating my sweet potatoes in there, and then you'll see in the end I drizzle in some pure maple syrup as well. Perfect combination with sweet potatoes. You can use self-rising flour in this instead of all-purpose flour, and then you wouldn't have to add the baking powder. I always add just a little bit more baking powder even when I use self-rising flour, but that's just me. Now, I wanted to give you a couple tips here when it comes to making these biscuits. The sweet potatoes that I home canned, I cubed. You can puree these first to have more of like a puree, a mash. I just throw them in as is. It does not bother me to see semi-whole sweet potatoes in my biscuits. Anybody who will eat them in my home, it doesn't bother them either. If you are worried, though, that there might be some picky eyes checking out your biscuits, going, what's in here? What is this? Absolutely mash them up really good before you throw them into your bowl. That's okay. The other thing I wanted to notate to you is if you are concerned about the amount of moisture, because I did strain them and let them sit there for a little while as I gathered the remaining ingredients, but they are not by any means as strained as they should be for certain recipes. So I hardly had to use a lot of buttermilk. So if you want, then I do recommend you puree the sweet potatoes and then strain it for a couple of hours to let a lot of that liquid come out of there. Then it would be perfect to use and you don't have to worry about added moisture from another ingredient such as buttermilk. When I form my biscuits, I try my very best to not work that dough very much. I put a ton of flour down. I pretty much get the outside good and floured. I pat it down, and then I use my biscuit cutters. I do not use a rolling pin. I only use my hands, and then I get the biscuit cutters very in a lot of flour. Do not turn as you're putting your biscuit cutter into your dough. I've heard this all of my life. I don't know that I know the real purpose for that, other than it goes back to what I'm thinking is you just don't want to keep working your dough. And if you're twisting and turning, you're working the gluten in there. So the first batch is 7 biscuits, and then my second batch is 7 biscuits. This made a lot of biscuits. We enjoyed them for the first 2 days, and then I threw the rest into the freezer. And this way, one of my favorite things to have is a biscuit on the ready, because it's not a lot of work to make biscuits, but when you're really wanting a biscuit on a Saturday or Sunday morning, sometimes it can feel like a lot of work to get those biscuits put together. I like to keep my cast iron buttered very generously when I'm making my biscuits. And my last biscuits that I form, I will use my biscuit cutter. I will cut the biscuit, and then I just gradually pull together the rest of the dough to basically form a circle. Now, I have seen people where they don't even go to that extent. They have their dough and they pretty much just cut it into like squares. Your biscuits can be any shape you want them to be. I just use a round pan, and so it's easier to have my biscuits in the shape of a circle, just like my pan. Now, we are currently in a pantry challenge, so you may have seen earlier I did not use buttermilk from the store. I have freeze-dried buttermilk, and that's what I use for all of my baking purposes. The only time I purchase buttermilk from the store is on a rare occasion. If I'm going to be frying up some chicken, I do like to have the real thing. Otherwise, for baking, it turns out great. So these biscuits are so amazing. They're not super sweet, but they are very delicious. They are perfect along the side of any sort of a meat, bacon, sausage, pork chops. Absolutely amazing. I had them with my corn hash breakfast. Thanks for watching.